Good morning and welcome to the next in our series for National Recovery Month. My name is Garcia Williams and I am the Executive Director of the MEDI Community Resource Center. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this next series. I am so excited about what is going to take place today. Throughout this month, we've offered a variety of different workshops. We premiered a documentary called Tipping the Pain Scale. And by the way, if you missed that, shame on you, but there'll be an opportunity for you to recapture that. But throughout this month, National Recovery Month, we've been focusing on resources, education, just to create a greater awareness about the substance abuse disorder and how it is impacting our community. Today, we're going to focus on recovery capital or resources that are available to those in recovery or for those who need to have a greater awareness of what is available to provide the level of support that's needed. So I have the pleasure of introducing to you Joanna Dolan, who is the CEO of Dolan Research International. Joanna has been on the battlefield. She's been involved in this process for a number of years, and she's going to share with you in her own way through her introduction as to how and what she's been able to do. I do want to remind you that this is a two-part series, and certainly once you complete the first segment of it, you're going to definitely want to tune in tomorrow for the next version of this session. But today's session is entitled Recovery Capital, the Currency of Recovery, and you're going to learn a lot. Don't even want to try to tell you as much, but I had a preliminary preview of it, and it certainly is packed with good information and details. And then tomorrow, the second session, part two, multiple pathways of recovery, finding resources for your recoveries. All that you need to know if you're directly involved, if you are in recovery, or if you want to support those who are in recovery, all of what you'll learn today and tomorrow will help you to do that. I will also remind you that if you want to, you have to, you must complete the second part of the series, because at the end of the series tomorrow, Joanna's going to talk about some features and resources and services that will be available to you at no cost. So you definitely want to do that. So thank you so much for joining us today. And without further ado, I introduce Joanna Dolan, CEO of Dolan Research International. Hello, Joanna, and welcome.
Hey, Garcia, thank you. Thank you for making this possible and for inviting me to do this with you over the next 2 days. I'm very excited to talk about this, and I'm very excited about this opportunity to be present with the peers in DC, and also like whoever else is going to, within the sound of my voice, is going to hear this. So thank you, and thank you to the MEDI, the Partners in Care Network, PIW, and also R1 Learning for making this happen. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's all right with you. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to talk about recovery capital, which is the currency of recovery. I just have to say I'm excited to be here with you all. My name is Joanna Dolan. I am the founder and CEO of Dolan Research International. Are you seeing my screen? The slides? Perfect. All right. So I am a professional life coach. I am a person in recovery, and I specialize in recovery. I'm also an RCPF, which means that I'm a recovery coach professional facilitator. And here at Dolan Research, what we do is we research recovery services. We research the tools that are available to us, and then we train thousands of people a year in LGBT and recovery related topics. And you know, as we're going through, we're going to be keeping an eye on the chat box for everyone on the Zoom, making certain that you are part of the conversation also. So we're going to have Chris and Garcia as part of this. So you're going to see them a little bit more as we go along. So to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to give you some information about recovery planning. We're going to give you some tools that can work for you in supporting your work, and we're going to share some of the cool things that are happening around building recovery capital. So this educational session provides information and resources related to the currency of recovery capital itself. And while the topic is complex and serious, we're going to have some fun as we go through this. So what we're going to talk, what you're seeing me do is when you see me looking this way, you are seeing me looking at you. When you see me looking this way, you are seeing me looking at the same presentation that you are seeing. So what you should have up on your screen right now is a slide that says today's agenda, paradigm shift, define recovery capital, measuring your recovery capital, and strengthen your recovery capital. So as long as we can all see that, we are good to go. So the other thing that you'll see is you will see myself and Chris here up in the top, probably right hand of your screen. Chris, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself as you're going to be monitoring our chat today?
Sure. Hi, my name is Chris McGinnis, and I work with Joanna at Dolan Research, and I will be running production on this. So I'll be monitoring any questions in the chat and asking those to Joanna. And so send us your questions.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the first thing on our agenda, which is the paradigm shift. So there has been a gradual paradigm shift in the way that addiction is viewed over time. At first, addiction was viewed as a moral dilemma, with alcoholism being somehow better than drug addiction in many people's eyes. And then it was viewed as an acute disease requiring treatment. And the time period of treatment varies from 28 days to 1 year. What we know is that the longer a person stays in treatment, or at least active in the recovery process, the greater their chances are of long-term recovery. So 5 years is kind of the rule of thumb. The most common model of addiction treatment is to learn the 5 valuable rules of the Minnesota model of addiction recovery. And those are behave responsibly, attend lectures on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, talk with other patients, make your bed, and stay sober. So if you've ever gone to a treatment program, you've probably heard some variation of this. And because of the progress that we've made in studying addiction, we now think about addiction as a chronic brain disease that requires extended care, medical, psychological, social, and for some of us, bringing our spiritual beliefs into the recovery process. And those things help us to develop ourselves as human beings, as well as help us to develop the inner and outer resources that we're going to need to be able to live a life in recovery. So the only definition, let me step back. The only problem with those definitions is this abundant focus on pathology. In other words, all we're doing when we're looking at addiction as a disease is, whether it's a moral dilemma or an acute disease or chronic brain disease, is all we're doing is staring the problem in the face over and over and over again, right? And we're talking about it as a problem. We're talking about how it shows up as a problem. And we've recently come to understand that that recovery is more than that, right? It's a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And that means that healing from substance use disorder or addiction is as much about harm reduction, sobriety, medication-assisted recovery, and improving our quality of life. For some of us, it's one of these things that leads to others, and for others of us, it is all 3 of these things, or in various ways that we look at it. So the new way of looking at it means that as we are shifting from focusing 100% on pathology, we're shifting to looking at our ecology of wellness. In other words, what does our environment do to help us with our wellness and help us with our recovery? And that helps us to establish health and happiness in recovery. In other words, as medical stability is established, we stop focusing 100% of our attention on what's wrong, and we start to focus on what's strong by empowering people to build their recovery capital. So traditional treatment models place people according to how severe their addiction is. And there's very little thought given to a person's recovery capital, but we know that these two work together. Models like this one, which was developed by William White and William Cloud, is one way of looking at assessing a person's needs for treatment, their recovery support, and additional services like housing or jobs or childcare or transportation, maybe family support, and lots of other things. So a good example of this is that if a person has high recovery capital, but they've got low problem severity, they might not require a 28-day treatment or extended recovery support. But in this model, if a person has high problem severity and low recovery capital, they're going to require more intensive services, not just in the addiction treatment medical part, but also in the community they go back to. So because every person is different, that's why we need to be able to talk about, define, and measure a person's recovery capital. And the reason that this matters is because a person's recovery capital can help them to stay in recovery, can help them improve their coping skills, and end the suffering caused by addiction by enhancing their quality of life in long-term recovery. So what exactly is recovery capital? Well, the term recovery capital refers to the internal and external resources that we need to achieve and maintain recovery. It recognizes that a variety of elements can support or endanger our recovery depending on the availability of the resources we have that empower us and how we use those resources. Understanding recovery capital provides us with a way to measure how much recovery a person has that goes beyond measuring days in recovery. And that gives us the ability to help people build a bridge from addiction to freedom in recovery. So we use recovery capital measurement tools to track change over time. And when you combine them with recovery capital planning, it gives us personally the tools to be able to develop plans for ourselves and others. And when we apply this to ourselves and we fill our own gaps in recovery, we become not only better recovery coaches, we also become happier in our own lives. So you might be asking, how long has recovery capital been around? Because I've never heard of it. Well, you wouldn't be alone. Recovery capital first showed up in recovery conversations about 30 years ago. And up until that point, we only had the ability to measure how ill someone was from addiction and not how well someone was in recovery. So if you were in recovery, there was a pretty good chance that you fell through the cracks. But you still need to continue building your recovery capital, which is really important to talk about that, right? So part of the reason we fall through the cracks when we're in recovery is because we have this perception that we're better or that the resources that we're using are always going to work for us, right? And that perception, actually the perception of how we perceive recovery at all really informs how we're going to approach recovery planning. So perception means that my recovery is what I say it is. And each one of us has our own view of what recovery means. For instance, consider answering for yourself. Is recovery broad or is it narrow? Is it roomy and all-inclusive or is it contained and rigid? Is it the same for everyone or is it left up to the individual? Is it flexible enough to account for differences between standards we set for ourselves and what we expect for those we provide peer recovery support services to? However you answered that, that is your perception of your recovery. And also, if you're working as a recovery coach, it's your perception of how you see other people getting well. So it all boils down to this, is that if we believe that we can transcend our addiction, we can. And that belief means that some of us reframe addiction from a curse to a blessing that brings unexpected gifts to our lives. And how we get to that place is a journey. And it's a journey that's well considered and well thought out. We can look at stages of change models by Dr. Prochaska and DiClemente, and we can allow them to guide us and what we need in order to be able to heal in each one of the stages. What you got, Chris?
Okay, so I have a question. What and how do we measure recovery capital?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked.
Did I just provide a good segue?
You totally provided a good segue because that's exactly what we're going to talk about, right? So,
Okay, cool.
yeah. So we measure recovery in a lot of different ways. There are right now 5 big ones. But in order to get to that place, you need to know that people have been studying recovery itself and working to develop those measurement tools to map how far we've come and to predict like how far we have to go and where we're going to go if we keep doing what we're doing. So the tools that you can use are learning tools like the Recovery Capital Discovery Cards, which are developed by R1 Learning. They're developed in conjunction with Dr. David Best, and those cards are an engaging version of the REC-CAP assessment. In other words, REC-CAP, right? So you can see it right there, REC-CAP. And that was also developed by Dr. David Best. And that's actually being used in some Maryland recovery residences as part of a pilot program. So assessments like the RCI or the Recovery Capital Index, the ARC or the assessment of recovery capital, and the BARC-10 or the brief assessment of recovery capital, those can all be used to measure someone's recovery capital, and they can be combined with hands-on tools that combine learning with those self-assessments to enable you to support yourself and others to understand and apply the complicated concepts, right? Because what we're talking about is complicated, but it doesn't have to be. We can make it simple by using a process of change. So the simplest process of change is measure, plan, take action, and measure again. And then along that process, we just make constant and never-ending daily improvements. And it's really that simple. So if you're like me, you might like to see the progress of your recovery capital over time. So the RCI or the Recovery Capital Index is a great tool to use for that. So we asked our friends over at the RCI to let us use the tool today, and they said yes. So this number that's on your screen right now, you can text the MEDI, which is THEMEDI, to 833-489-8630. And that's going to give you the ability to sign up for a free 14-day series that allows you to measure your recovery capital. And it's going to reinforce or remind you of some of the things that we've talked about here today. Again, to take them up on this generous offer and to try the RCI to start measuring more than just how many days you have in recovery, text the MEDI, THEMEDI, to 833-489-8630. And if you're feeling generous, just give us your name. After you get your first message, you can just say, hey, my name is Chris, or my name is Joanna. Oh, you got it. Good deal. Okay, so you're going to get those text messages. They're going to be a different one every day for the next 13 days. And what we're going to talk about with you is we're going to give you the opportunity to measure your own recovery capital, as well as we're going to share some information about some of the science behind recovery capital, as well as what some of the recovery capital domains are. So from a real high level, you can think about things like the R1 learning cards, the BARC and the ARC and the RECAP as objective, right? So did I get that right? Subject, no? Well, whatever. Brain fart. Sorry about that. So you can think about it. Oh, there we go. Objective. So you can think about using an RCI or BARC 10. That is measuring your perception, right? How does it feel to be in your skin around these things, right? And then you can combine it with objective measurement tools like data gathering forms. And those forms ask about a person's social determinants of health, and they can support us in creating recovery plans with recoveries and their care teams. So the number one thing to remember when creating recovery plans is that the plan is the recoveries, not ours. So it's important that when they're deciding what they want for their lives, right, they are the ones that are deciding, not us. So let's break it down what we're measuring. And as we go through this, what you'll likely start to recognize is the connections between social determinants of health as well as recovery capital. And you aren't the only person to make the connection. In fact, throughout the country, coaches and organizations are drawing the connections which insurers and other members of a person's recovery care team are using to support people with individualized, strength-based, person-centered care. In fact, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare are using something called Z codes that empower healthcare providers to refer individuals to social service organizations, coaches, and appropriate services through local, state, and national resources. So we'll go ahead and start with personal capital. So personal capital is our physical capital, and it's what we have to meet our basic needs, right? So our personal health, like how is my body functioning, my health care, financial resources. Do I have the financial resources for my daily living, clothing, food, and then, shelter that is safe and easily lived in, right? And then do I have transportation? So the next one is social capital. And with social capital, our resources are our relationships with our friends and our family, relationships with other people in recovery, and supportive partners. So in social capital, we're also talking about the availability of recovery-related social events. So finding organizations like this one that can provide you with the opportunity to get together with other people in recovery and do fun things. So emotional support is something that we have to talk about when we talk about social capital, because it is a major part of our social capital. And this is the support that we get to meet our emotional needs from our social networks. In other words, when life is going bad, can you reach out to the people in your network and tell them life is really hard right now and get some emotional support? Same is true for when life is going really good. Can you call someone when life is going really good and tell them, you won't guess what just happened today, and they'll get just as excited as you are. So some of our emotional support comes from the community that has become important to us, right? So it could be the people you play Minecraft with. It could be the people at your local juice bar or coffee shop. It could be the choir members at your church, or maybe the members of your mom's group, or something completely different that you know about that I wouldn't know about because it's your life, right? And it's your community. So that brings us right to community capital, right? So our community capital is the attitudes and the policies and the resources that are specifically related to helping people resolve substance use disorders. And community resources are many and varied. They include things like activism and advocacy aimed at reducing stigma. So watching movies and hanging out with people that are watching movies like Tipping the Pain Scale, those folks are doing things that are designed at reducing stigma. The full range of addiction treatment resources, right? So 28-day providers and detoxes and drying out facilities, all of those IOPs, all of those make up part of our community resources. Peer-led support groups like mutual aid groups, where you could go and you could meet a recovery coach and find maybe a peer supporter, somebody that can walk this journey of recovery with us. And we're going to talk about mutual aid groups and all of these things in much greater detail tomorrow. So recovery community organizations, there are many throughout our region, and connecting with them can help you to find fun activities as well as the pathway that is the most important for you. Recovery support institutions, educational-based recovery support. So if you're still in high school, look for a recovery high school. We have them. The movie Generation Found tells a lot about recovery high schools and a little bit about collegiate recovery programs. So there's lots of us that come into recovery, that go back to school or are in college when we enter recovery, and collegiate recovery programs are becoming more and more available, and they support us in more and more ways. So recovery housing is another community resource. Many of us have heard about sober living homes or halfway houses or PHP programs. All of these make up recovery housing networks. And of course, I would be remiss to not include things like Oxford houses, right? Where people are coming together who are choosing to live in recovery and stay in recovery together. Recovery ministries and churches and synagogues. There's many, many different places where you can get your spiritual needs met while talking about your recovery. Visible and diverse local recovery role models. So everyone knows someone who's in their community that's all about recovery. And you know that if you reach out to them, or you reach out to the people that are around them, that you're going to be able to get connected to resources that you've been looking for. And then, of course, you know, you've got the resources that help us to sustain recovery and that can help us with interventions that are just part of our everyday life that we don't even think about. Things like employee assistance programs, drug courts. Those help us to actually treat the disease while giving us the opportunity to enter into recovery in a much more healthy, recovery-focused, person-centered way. So when you think about community capital, we're also thinking about cultural resources, right? So I've named a couple of cultural resources like ministries and those types of things. But we've also got a lot of resources that are available for diverse ethnic and racial backgrounds, the LGBT community, and many other resources that are available for people like differently abled folks and others. So there is definitely the ability to find what calls to you in your community as part of your culture that can help us to obtain and maintain and sustain long-term recovery and further develop our recovery capital. So that leads us to human capital, right? So human capital it's about our values. It's about our skills and what we know. It's about our ability to solve problems. It's about our education or our credentials. It's really, it involves our self-awareness. Like, how aware am I of myself in my own skin? And how does that carry forward in my self-esteem and also in my belief in myself? And do I have a sense of optimism, or is that something I need to develop? All of these things that make up our human capital, they help us to navigate challenging situations and to achieve our goals. They help us to develop a sense of meaning and of purpose in our life. And there's questionnaires that you can use, like the PERMA questionnaire, or the optimism test, or the gratitude survey, and they can support us both personally and professionally when working with others. So those links are going to be in the chat down below, so you can take advantage of them yourself. And then, our commitment to recovery is key to being able to establish and maintain recovery from substance use. And the reason that it's key is because we can want recovery for someone else all we want, but we can't force it on them. Just like people wanted recovery for me for a long time, but forcing me into it was not the way to make it happen. And I'm sure that you probably have some stories like that too, where it's like, oh yeah, this person was trying, like looking back, this person was trying to make me do these things and I just wasn't ready, or I wasn't interested, right? What we're finding is that things like medication assisted therapy or abstinence, they might be mandated, they might be forced on us, they might be a requirement for a drug court or something like that. And we can do those things, but recovery itself has to be voluntary. And being able to own our decision about why we want to be in recovery, why we want our life to get better, and acknowledging our own personal commitment, no matter what it is, empowers us to move through the stages of change with dignity. Sometimes the very best that we can do is, I just don't want to be sick and tired anymore. I'm sick and tired of waking up with a hangover. I'm sick and tired of showing up at work late. I'm sick and tired of people talking about me. I just want to be better for my kids. I want to be better employee, or a better, sibling, or a better kid, whatever that is for you. That one thing can be the thing that lights off a long-term commitment to recovery. And that's really what we're aiming for. That is your decision, that it's my decision, that it's not someone else's decision for us. And all of this, all the things that we've talked about, right? So human capital and social capital and commitment to recovery and emotional support, they all help us to develop well-being, which is basically how comfortable, healthy, and happy we are. All of the things that we've been talking about are components of our well-being. And well-being really is about both the realization of our goals as well as our overall life satisfaction. So tools like this Wheel of Life can support us in visualizing our perception of our personal well-being. This tool here is a simple tool that you can use to support yourself and others to set and reach goals. Asking things like, are my emotions supporting me and providing me with empowering meaning today, can really go a long way, right? Because yeah, sometimes my emotions are doing that, but sometimes my emotions are holding me back. And knowing that gives me the power and the ability to make changes or not make changes. Things like, does my work and my mission fuel my passion for my life mission? Well, maybe it does. Maybe it just pays the bills. And in early recovery, paying the bills is really important. Actually, in all of recovery, being able to pay your bills is really important. If you get the ability to have it fuel other things in your life, well, that's a perk and a bonus, right? But it starts with being able to say, okay, well, I like what I'm doing right now. And I think I'd like to do more. Or I like what I'm doing right now, and I think I'd like to make it better, right? Being able to answer those questions honestly really helps us to be on a path where we don't have to use, right? Because we're so excited about the life that we're living, we're so supported, and we're able to support others that we don't need to drop out. So what you'll find is you ask these questions of people and you ask these questions of yourself, is that you're developing self-awareness and you're helping other people to develop self-awareness. And that self-awareness enables us to see that everybody's well-being meter is different, right? So another way of saying that is what I think is healthy might be different from what you think is healthy. And that what I think is healthy right now may be different than what my future Joanna thinks is healthy. Or what I think is healthy right now might be very different from what past Joanna thought was healthy. And so the more self-awareness I develop, the more opportunities I get to expand how I live and breathe and move through my life. And also it gives me the ability to do the things that make my recovery important and meaningful for me and help me to touch people in ways that matter to them. I think the key thing to remember is that we're always meeting people, including ourselves, where they are, and we're going with them for the journey, because that's what recovery is. It's a journey, right? And so along that journey, there's going to be some barriers, right? So we got to talk about weaknesses next. And any solution that doesn't take into account our obstacles or our barriers is just not a full solution. The barriers that prevent our access to recovery, right? Or that prevent our progress in building recovery supports, those are the things that we need to look full on in the face. And then we need to decide some strategies to help us to overcome those barriers. So things like continuing to use, involvement with the crime or the justice system, homelessness, or even insecure housing, lack of meaningful activities. These are all definitely barriers. You know, if you're a parent, things like not having childcare, or if you're a high school student or a middle school student, if you're a student, right, returning back to the school where your drug dealer is, or, you know, not having a high school diploma or a GED, those are also barriers to recovery. And they're barriers that we can support people in navigating and resolving for themselves. And this is where strengthening recovery capital and having resources help affirm a person's commitment to recovery, right? The more problems we're able to solve, the more problems we're able to help people to learn how to resolve, you know, on their own and in conjunction with other people, the greater it affirms their commitment to recovery, right? Like, think about it. When I am going through a hard time and I don't know how to resolve it, I might feel like like the easiest solution would be to check out or to pick up. But if I can involve someone else and share with them, this is what my challenge is, these are the options that I see available to me, and that I need help seeing other options. If that person can help me find other options and resources, then I've got real decisions, not just options, right? And those decisions help me to be empowered and help me to stay in recovery, because I realize that no matter what's going on, I don't need to use. And so overcoming barriers is a way to affirm recovery again and again and again. We just keep reminding ourselves and others, like, okay, is this really an option? Because, you know, are you going to use if you start doing that? And if the answer is yes, well, then what do we do about it? Right? What do I want to do about it? What do you want to do about it? And is there another option that doesn't involve me using again? Right? That level of questioning, that little bit of motivational interviewing really helps people to be able to see that we can live life without our substance of no choice. And when we look at it, what it does is it turns our unmet needs into our met needs. You know, my perception, right? So we're going back to perception, right? Because how I see recovery impacts how I am in recovery. How I see recovery impacts my ability to develop some recovery capital. But how I see my unmet needs can also be a barrier to recovery, right? If I think I'm not getting help, well, I need to check in about that, right? Because sometimes it's true that I'm not getting help, but sometimes it's a faulty perception. And that's a space where coaching can help. So if someone tells us that they're not getting help, we need to check in with them. And if we find that it's a perception, right, that it's just how I see things, but it's not really reality, we can support people to develop personal recovery skills like using a feelings check-in, right? A feelings check-in could be something as simple as on a 0 to 10, tell me how you feel about this, right? It could be developing a gratitude practice or a gratitude list. And it also might be finding people who support our recovery in tangible ways, right? In ways that we can reach out and touch, and then we can thank that person. The action of checking in for what's right is just as helpful as checking in for what's wrong. In fact, both are always available, what's right and what's wrong. And when we can model recovery practices like looking for where my perception might be a little off, and we can use recovery principles like looking for the solution and not the problem, we can not only become better as people in recovery ourselves, as coaches, but also we can role model for other people like, hey, you can do hard things, and it's okay to have a misperception or a misunderstanding that doesn't serve you, and to be able to change that. In fact, when you think back on things, like think back on your social determinants of health, right? So think about how your local health department or your recovery community organization or your treatment center can help you to meet your unmet needs and your recovery's unmet needs. When we think about that, we're able to see like, okay, well, there are things that can help me to get transportation if transportation is a problem. It may not be something I want, but it is definitely giving me what I need. And that knowing the differences between what I want and what I need can help us to create a gap map and give us something to strive for while being able to help us to take care of our immediate concerns. And, you know, like the hope that comes from knowing that there's options to improve our recovery capital over time can spark a determination to remain in recovery. Alternatively, the potential of losing recovery capital, things like the potential of losing a spouse or a professional license that we worked hard to get, or our quality of life going down, those may increase our determination to overcome the challenges of recovery, early recovery, but they also could set us back. And so knowing what makes us tick and knowing how a person is with their recovery capital, that can really help us, right? So let's say that you are struggling with being uncomfortable. You're just not able to experience discomfort without needing to use. Got it. You know, like maybe a solution to that could be tapping into the recovery capital that you have and being able to share that information with someone else that you know, like, and trust. But it also could be the opportunity to develop a new skill that you don't currently have, like meditation or mindfulness, which is a scientifically validated practice that many people use to help us to breathe and be okay with uncomfortability, allowing us to actually live our lives despite the feeling that's happening, which gives us the ability to outgrow those feelings. And, we can model what hope looks like and feels like through the proper use of our stories. So if we find that we've been through a similar situation, we can tell that person that, like I can remember feeling that way, and I felt that way until I found a group of other people that uh, were also knew what it was like. And I asked them what they did. They told me what they did that did not involve using, and I found relief. And now I have a skill set that I can use again and again and again, and I can share with someone else, right? Like our appropriate use of ourselves and our own stories is part of our recovery capital. In fact, you may have noticed that the language that I've been using, is things like self-assessment, checking in with recoveries, modeling recovery practices, asking people what matters to them, asking people, asking ourselves, right? Like a self-awareness. These are coaching skills that when we use them to address to address recovery capital, we're able to support people. So things like motivational interviewing and asking good questions and active listening, as well as having resources and being a good resource broker, can really support us in being excellent recovery coaches, and also support the people that we're coaching to improve their lives in ways that really matter to them. So even though there's lots of moving parts, you can see right there, there's lots and lots of moving parts to this recovery capital toolbox, right? It really doesn't take much to start building some recovery capital. The first step is to acknowledge where we are. And we do that by measuring our recovery capital and by asking ourselves really good questions like, what is my living situation? Do I have enough money to pay my bills? When was the last time I worked? And how do I feel about all that? Once we have some answers like that, we're able to start creating a vision for our lives that we're willing to work towards, right? Like, I just wanted, like, when I got into recovery, I just wanted to be a productive member of society that wasn't in constant pain or suffering. That was all I wanted, right? And I didn't know how to get to that place. But a day at a time, I got to that place. And inviting help and being helped, and then, reaching out and helping others is how I was able to start to develop this vision for my life that every day I work towards. And also to develop a plan to reach my goals, right? So like the first goal is I wanted to not be sick. Well, the way not to be sick was to stop using, because that's what I needed to do, right? Maybe different from you. You may need some medication, or something else. Harm reduction to get you to the place where you're willing to take whatever the next step is for you, right? But for me, it was a matter of, I needed to stop, because alcohol was my drug of no choice. That's the best way to end that suffering. But then I needed to learn how to be with all of the symptoms of recovery, all the symptoms of withdrawal and the long-term withdrawals. And I learned that from doctors and from other people in recovery. And they gave me the ability to develop plans and strategies to help me to start building towards my long-term goal of being healthy and happy and productive. And so we've got this handout that it's part of your 14-day text series that you're going to get from us. And it's something that you can use yourself, or you can use with your recoveries to help you to create recovery goals. You can use it to keep notes for strategies. You can use it to track where you are in the process. And this form was designed by Sharon Hesseltine. She is the chair of the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, which is another place that I strongly encourage you to check out, is the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. You can check it out by going to the link, which is in the comments. And you know, you can find other people that are also doing this work. So this form is a super simple way to keep track of your recovery care plan, either yours or the people that you're working with. Recoveries can not only use it for themselves, but they can also share it with their recovery care team. And like I said, you're going to get it in the 14-day RCI text series. And, you know, to wrap it up, peers are not an island. And neither are the other members of a person's recovery care team. Some recoveries are going to want to share their good work with their family members, their community, and their recovery care teams. And that's amazing. We encourage that. In fact, that's part of tapping into your recovery capital as your social capital and your community. You know, when we work with recoveries and their support networks, we're able to heal quicker and go further. And having said that, make certain that you are abiding by the rules of your organization, as well as the state and federal laws to make it not only helpful, but also truly non-harmful for people who are seeking to involve other people in their recovery. So the benefits of integrating recovery capital into a person's recovery care plan is that by building recovery capital, not only do we develop, improve, and maintain our long-term recovery, we also support the recovery to build a beautiful life in the process, a life that they won't need to use over again or over period, right? A life that even when it gets hard, they're going to have the tools and the systems in place to support them in not returning to use. So tomorrow, when we get together, we're going to talk about multiple pathways of recovery, and we're going to talk about how we distinguish that from how we get to recovery and how we stay in recovery, and some of the resources that are available to us. And, you know, the most important thing that I have to say is thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention and for your interest. It really matters. What you do for yourself and the people that we work with matters in great measure. And organizations like the MEDI and Partners in Care and PIW and R1, people like Garcia and Stacy that make things like this available, SOAR grants, and all of those things that made this available for you today, they matter. So thank you, everybody I just named, and those that I don't know about too, for making this happen. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow when we talk about multiple pathways of recovery. And that's all I have to say. Chris, you got anything before we bounce?
No, that was really good. I appreciated that information. So, and I'm glad you put all the chats in, or all the comments in the chat, the links to everything, so that people can follow up.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. All right, guys. Well, we will see you tomorrow, and thank you for hanging out with us. Have a great day.